technology works. So we're going to try something a little bit different to show you this morning. It's a tool called Verify that we use. It provides more of an immersive presentation style. It's one step closer to bringing you to site, if you will. And basically what I'm going to sort of skip to, I'm going to skip to the meat, which is what's getting us most excited these days right now specifically. But before I do that, a couple things, matters of housekeeping. Yes, I will be making some forward-looking statements as I always do. Just a quick commentary regarding our capitalization and ownership structure. Some of you who follow us would have seen that we completed a financing for about $17 million. It was 16 and a half this past November. It was oversubscribed, which is kind of a rarity in our business these days. But I think one thing to point to here that's really germane is this aspect of who got into this financing. Essentially, this was our first major institutional round of financing, and a lot of the London institutions did start to pile into the stock, which I think is pretty important in terms of our funding our needs going forward. We do have about $15.5 million in the treasury, more than enough to fulfill what we need to get done this year. Just a bit of a memory refresher. There's really two phases of exploration and production on this trend in Delamar. The first phase started in the late 1800s. This was very much a high-grade flavor of mining underground, and during that period, grades of 30, 60, 90 grams per ton mined underground were certainly very common, and we see that throughout the archives that we have on site. And then roll the clock forward to the 1970s, and this is when the era of open pit, low grade bulk tonnage mining started to come into vogue, and roll in Kinross, which operated successfully at Delamar from the late 70s to the late 1990s. And some of you might recall me saying this, but I'll say it again. Part of our due diligence process was to look at how much gold was in the ground and left behind by Kinross. And this is very important for us because you always have that nagging question, why are they selling this to you? So the first thing we looked at is the resource base and ticked that box pretty quickly. There's a very large remnant resource base that sits in the ground between surface and about 150 meters. All told, we've got about 3.6 million ounces of gold equivalent to work with. I get the question often as well, what does Idaho look like from a support point of view? This is one great quote that we put out there from Governor Butch Otter. Butch has been a great supporter. His new replacement is an even stronger supporter of the mining business in Idaho. So just to move to kind of the sizzle, what's really getting us excited of late, and this is the starting point. So this is essentially 2.6 million ounces right there of gold equivalent. That's Delamar. This is about 850,000 ounces of gold equivalent at Florida. And so we conducted a lot of drilling, and essentially most of our mission over the past year was to do some infill drilling and to step out on what was known, step out on the limits of what was known. And I'll show you what's really been getting us really excited on site is this zone called Sullivan Gulch. And I've talked to this audience before about Sullivan Gulch. In fact, I think I rolled out the very first assays that we got last year out of Sullivan Gulch, which were essentially right up here. So we've been steadily drilling this zone, stepping out on what's known, and getting these great hits. And when I'm talking about these great intercepts, I'm talking about hundreds of meters of thickness of gold and silver mineralization in grams, in grades between 1.5 and 2.5 grams per ton gold equivalent. So when you've got something of that significance, of that thickness, you're onto something. And I'll show this a bit later on in the presentation in 3D and what it looks like. But essentially, what I'm going to belabor this point today is how this last drill hole that we put out last week was such a big game changer for us. So I'd like to draw your attention to that drill hole there, hole 59 as we call it, which is really truly a game changer for us. It's 2.5 grams per ton of gold equivalent over 109 meters. It bottomed in mineralization. That's as far as we could push the drill down to that depth. But I'll tell you why that this intercept so important to us? It's so important to us because it is, to date, our largest step out. We took a really big bet. We stepped out almost 300 meters away from the closest drill intercept, which would have been this one at the time. And not only does the mineralization connect, but the geology connects. So we're showing coherence in an ore body that's, roughly speaking, now outside of the resource envelope, about 400 meters long outside of the resource envelope. The plan for 2019, pretty simple. We're going to be doing a bit of the same thing as we did this year, lots of drilling, infill and step out, but we're also going to be putting together a plan and study, and that kind of harkens back to what Gwen mentioned. We're trying to get this project ready to be shovel ready in 3 years, and that's what the PEA plan is going to do. So I'm just going to jump quickly to a bit more sizzle here and take you to site, essentially. And so this is the site. This is what Delamar looks like. This is the 2.5 or 2.6 million ounce resource. That's about 2 kilometers long. For us, really the obvious places to explore, we're on strike to the northwest and to the southeast where Sullivan Gulch is. And so I'm going to zoom quickly into the Sullivan Gulch area. This is kind of my favorite part of the presentation right here because it takes you there. And so this is a top-down look of Delamar. There's the two, roughly speaking, 2 kilometer strike length, and that's 2.6 million ounces AuEq. So it's a big deposit. So picture a deposit that essentially starts here and it goes all the way to Granville Island. It's that big. And so our mission really was to look at these 2 areas on strike. There's Henrietta, there's Milestone up there. You'll be seeing results coming out of that pretty soon. But really our area of focus has been this area here, Sullivan Gulch. And so I'm going to take you on a bit of a tour, basically lifting the hood on the car, so to speak, and showing you what this looks like from beneath the surface. And I'm going to shut off the open pit. And I'm just going to slowly rotate around the deposit just to show you how much drilling we have done outside of the resource, which is the blue, those blue shaded blocks, essentially. That's the 2.6 million ounces. And what I've also shaded here on this diagram is the yellow intercepts, which are above the cutoff of the deposit, 0.3. And just to put things into perspective, that big step out hole that we put out last week is, roughly speaking, about 3 times the average grade of the deposit that we quoted earlier this year. So we're quite excited. But as you can see, there's a lot of yellow essentially outside of the resource boundary. And as I spin it around, you can see it's not just Sullivan Gulch, but it's elsewhere. Whoops. And essentially what this proves is this deposit is very definitely going to grow, and not just in the Sullivan Gulch area, which is 400 meters long, which is on average 150 meters thick, but it's going to grow elsewhere. I'm also going to show you something else that's pretty cool that we use as a tool. We use ground geophysics as a tool on site, and one of the things that works extremely well on site is IP geophysics. And so this is the outline of the deposit right here. That's the 2.6 million ounces, and I'm going to put up the IP geophysics just to show you what that looks like. And so essentially this red shape here is the 2.6 million ounces. This is Sullivan Gulch, and it's wide open in that direction. It's going to get bigger, there's no question. So I wish I had more time to take you to Florida Mountain. That's essentially just up the road in that direction. That's a great deposit of its own right. But just to kind of round things off in terms of what we're doing this year. So we've got 2019, which is going to be a year full of drilling. 2019 is going to be the PEA study, which is going to essentially be an economic study. What does this look like as a milling option? What does this look like as a heap leach option? What do we think that these 2 means of processing ore on site could look like in parallel? And how big can this deposit get to? Our milestones for the year, sometime in the second quarter of this year, a brand new resource update. The PEA study will be ready sometime after the midpoint of this year, and throughout the year we'll have a lot of drilling information to release to the public. I hope I've transported you there today using a bit of different technology. We've got a booth out there. I'll show you Florida Mountain. We've got some really cool things to show out there. Thank you very much.